Kosciuszko Chair Spring Symposium. This year's virtual conference will focus on the topic of crisis in the Intermarium, war in Ukraine and its implications. Today's joint virtual symposium is organized by the Institute of World Politics and is in honor of Lady Blanka Rosenstiel. For those of you who are new, IWP is a graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs. We offer a doctoral program, 7 master's degree programs, including 2 online MAs, and 18 certificates of graduate study. If you're interested in learning more about us, please visit iwp.edu. On behalf of IWP, I'd like to thank all our supporters who make these events possible. Today, we will hear from Dr. Lucja Cannon, who will give a lecture entitled Poland, Ukraine, From Love to Conflict. Dr. Cannon is a senior research fellow at the Institute of World Politics Center for Intermarium Studies. Her research interests include Europe, Russia, and China, and the foreign policy of the United States in areas of politics, political economy, and energy. Currently, Dr. Cannon is conducting research studies and preparing publications on the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its impact on political, military, and economic relationships in NATO and the European Union, and the role of the United States. She also served as a scholar at Washington foreign policy think tanks, including most recently with the Center for Strategic and International Studies as an adjunct fellow for 17 years. She studied the effectiveness of market reforms in Eastern Europe and in China, and advised international business action commissions, CEOs of major corporations interested in reforms in transition economies. She's the author of numerous reports, studies, and book chapters, and her articles and book reviews appeared in the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, Houston Chronicle, Washington Times, Washington Examiner, American Conservative, Privatization International, Reuters, Polish Review, and others. She was a commentator for radio and TV and a lecturer on market reforms in developing countries at international conferences, U.S. government institutions, and universities in Denmark, Germany, Turkey, Cyprus, Spain, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Russia, and the United States. She received a BA, a Master's of Philosophy, and a PhD in International Relations and Russian Eastern European Studies from Columbia University, where she was an International Fellow and IREX Junior Scholar at Warsaw University and London School of Economics. Please welcome Dr. Lucja Cannon.
So today I wanted to speak about the relationship between Poland and Ukraine, which changed so much during the past 2 years. The 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine is a challenge to the post-Cold War international order that was established by the collapse of the Soviet Union and liberation of Eastern Europe from Soviet domination. And the Polish government recognized it as such immediately. It extended ROK solidarity to Ukraine, and it provided all-out assistance in the first days of the war. So Ukraine could withstand this initial onslaught and to hold up this international order, which guaranteed independence of Eastern Europe. It also underlined the importance of leadership of Poland in the eastern flank of NATO. Poland also agreed to be a hub of American assistance towards Ukraine. And this was also underlining the crucial role of the United States in holding up this Western order. Poland helped to revive American leadership in Europe and to establish anti-Putin coalition. This coalition, based on the solidarity between Poland and Ukraine, basically revived and transformed the NATO alliance. President Biden recognized the important role of Poland by visiting it right after the invasion in March of 2022, and then in February of 2023. And for the second anniversary of the war, he invited President of Poland, Duda, and Prime Minister Tusk to Washington to discuss international security and assistance to Ukraine. So all these visits sort of underline the importance of Poland to the war effort and to the eastern flank of NATO, as well as the relationship with the United States. So why is Poland the most ardent supporter of Ukraine? First of all, and maybe obviously, is that because it identifies with the fate of Ukraine of being invaded by a more powerful neighbor. Polish historians say that Poland was invaded 13 times in the last 250 years by Russia. So there is this great emotional identification with Ukraine in its current predicament. Second of all, there is, of course, a strategic reason that Poland wants to keep the Russian army away from its old borders, so it wants to help Ukraine to resist the invasion. Third, there is a widespread acceptance in Poland of Zbigniew Brzezinski's concept that Russia needs Ukraine in order to be an empire. And if Russia is deprived of Ukraine, it will become a normal country that is not expansionary, but more concerned with its own internal development. And the fourth reason is historical. It is based on the concept of Intermarium, a historical legacy where these countries were part of the same political entity, Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And now it has a modern form of the Three Seas Initiative, which is a regional grouping of these countries to sort of develop infrastructure projects and to help each other. So Polish government thought that Ukraine will become an important member and sort of a supplement to this group. So Poland was instrumental to help Ukraine withstand this initial onslaught of Russian power, and that was successful. And that gave time to Ukraine to essentially gave time to other countries, more powerful Western countries, to find time to make decisions and to make a decision to help Ukraine. So how did Poland help Ukraine in this initial period? First of all, it gave support on moral, political, and military plane. In the first days of the war, Poland gave all of its Soviet equipment plus some new equipment that it produces to Ukraine. So it happened in this decisive initial period of the war. Poland gave Ukraine 250 tanks, later on another 60 more modern tanks, so together over 300 tanks, hundreds of armored vehicles, ammunition, guns, anti-aircraft missile systems, drones. Basically everything that it had was transferred to Ukraine. I hope that you remember that there was a flap about Polish MiG airplanes when one of the American diplomats revealed their existence, and there was a discussion what to do. But Poland basically by then pushed all of its MiG planes across the border and gave them to Ukraine. So that was very important. And there were other related services where Poland provided repairs to military equipment that was used in Ukraine. It provided training to Ukrainian soldiers, and it provided medical services, which were still going on. There are a lot of Polish medics that are serving at the front to help evacuate Ukrainian soldiers to hospitals and to give them first aid. So the next important level of this aid was spontaneous humanitarian assistance. The first evening of the invasion, when the streams of Ukrainian refugees started going across the border, there were thousands of Polish citizens standing at the border, standing at the bus stations and railroad stations, and receiving these Ukrainian refugees. They took them to their own homes, they offered them food, they offered them rides. So Poland is the only country that does not have refugee camps. All these refugees were essentially accommodated in private places, and they didn't have to be institutionalized in any way. At the level of sort of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, the main organization in Poland is the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church engaged all of its power to help Ukraine. Every parish in Poland helped refugees. There were over 100 monasteries that helped. Every Catholic organization in Poland was involved. They were putting up people in their parishes' homes, in monasteries, taking care of children, taking care of those who needed medical help. They also have hundreds of priests and monks in Ukraine who are coordinating this aid in all different things. So it is very, very extensive. The Polish government also had a very important role, because few days after the invasion, it made a decision to extend all privileges of Polish citizenship to the Ukrainians. It gave them a PESEL number, which is equivalent to Social Security. And with that came a right of residence in Poland, right to work, right to go to school, right to receive medical care, and right to receive welfare and child benefits. So the Ukrainians in Poland, at some point there were 10 million of them. Right now, about 1 million have this PESEL number, and are actually working in Poland, were extended all these benefits. And the Polish government was important in one other way, that it organized this very extensive information campaign. On the Polish government website, gov.pl, you have listings of all the people who are seeking help and the people who are providing help. People write down what kind of services, legal, political, or medical, they are willing to provide. There's contact information. There are people who are seeking accommodations or help in different ways. So this is all coordinated through Polish government websites. And the fourth way, which was also extremely important, especially in the long term, was to serve as a hub for American assistance. So the Polish government allowed the United States to establish a military base in Rzeszów, which is a town closest to the Ukrainian border. And the airport there was expanded to be used for planes bringing military and humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. There are planes there that are landing every few minutes. It's extremely efficient. And then this aid is being loaded into trains, into trucks, and immediately taken to Ukraine. So it is a very big logistical operation. And originally, these routes were used for this assistance from Western countries, but it was hoped that in the future, this will be also a route of trade, more extensive trade between Poland and Ukraine. And this is what happened. But in a sense, it also became a source of problems. And this was because essentially, because of military operations, Russia closed off Ukrainian ports on the Azov Sea. It also threatened ports on the Black Sea. So Ukraine could not use these traditional routes to export its goods, mainly agricultural, to third world countries, mainly in Africa and the Middle East. So because these routes were closed on 30th of May 2022, European Union decided to open the border between Ukraine and the European Union countries. So, and it removed all duties, all VAT taxes and stuff like that. But because Ukraine is one of the largest producers of agricultural goods in the world, especially grain, it became a source of destabilization in Europe in general, but especially in Eastern Europe. So I wanted to emphasize that the border is open to all sorts of goods, and because the factories have been largely destroyed, it concerns export of agricultural goods such as grain, corn, rape seeds, sunflower seeds and oil, fruits and vegetables, sugar, honey. But I'm going to talk mainly about grain, which is the biggest and the most important of exports, and also the most troublesome in a way. So essentially, this export started, and within 1 year, Ukraine exported 10 million tons of grain into Eastern European countries, of which 4 million was into Poland. And only a very small fraction of it was actually for transit, for export to other countries. The great majority of it was sold in Poland. And it undercut the local farmers, who were also big grain producers. They essentially, the price of Ukrainian grain was very low for two reasons. One was that the environmental standards were much lower than in the European Union. In the European Union, you have very strict regime about using pesticides, using fertilizers, and in Ukraine, it does not apply. But the main reason was that farms in the European Union are small. They are family farms. The average size of a farm in Western Europe is 19 hectares, and in Poland, it's 11 hectares. In Ukraine, you basically have a takeover, oligarch takeover of old collective farms. And they are extremely large. The largest one has 600,000 hectares. There are about 100 so-called agro holdings that have over 10,000 hectares. So these are huge, much more efficient. This is industrial production of agricultural goods. And they are owned by these oligarchs, together with a lot of Western investors, American, German, Dutch, Israeli, and they are mostly registered in tax havens outside of Ukraine, so they don't really pay taxes in Ukraine. So because of this flood of this grain, after 1 year, there were protests on the borders against this indiscriminate importation of Ukrainian grain. And on the 30th of March 2023, European Union decided to take action, and it put an embargo on imports of Ukrainian grain into European Union countries, but it was still allowed to import it for purposes of transit to ports to be sold outside of the European Union. So that was a great victory for farmers, but in practice, it turned out to be almost meaningless because of the corruption of Ukrainian institutions. They simply, and agro holdings, maybe you can say, that basically they kept importing grains. They would falsify the documentation. They would claim it was something else and not grain. It would claim that it was for transit, while in fact they were selling it in Poland. They were taking it to Germany or to Lithuania, claiming that that's where they were planning to take this grain, and then they would turn around and enter Poland and sell it there. So basically, because of the corruption, there was continuing flood of Ukrainian grain into Eastern Europe, but particularly Poland, because it has this most extensive border connections with Ukraine. And the Polish customs issued a statement where they said that they are unable to control it, that the volumes are so high and there is so much falsification that they cannot cope with the situation. So despite all these problems, on the 15th of September 2023, European Union decided to lift this embargo on import of Ukrainian grain. And the same day, the governments of East European countries, Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia, imposed the same embargo on imports of grain into their own countries. And they were hoping that they could negotiate with Ukraine some sort of an agreement to limit these exports, and such agreements were signed with Romania and Bulgaria. So they were very surprised when on 19th of September, which is only a few days later, President Zelensky gave a speech at the United Nations, and he said, "Some countries are feigning solidarity, but they act on directions of Moscow." So basically, he said that these East European countries are fake friends. They pretend to be friends, but they are really agents of Moscow. They are acting in the interests of Moscow by trying to cut down on this importation of Ukrainian grain. And he not only did that, he also canceled the meeting with the Polish president that was scheduled. He forbid all contact with Polish officials, and he sued these countries at the World Trade Organization. So they thought this was a minor dispute that could be resolved by negotiations, but he made this very, very public insult of telling them that they were Russian agents because they didn't agree to this uncontrolled import of Ukrainian grain. During the same speech, he also said many things about Germany. He flattered it. He said that Germany should be a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, that it should be a superpower. And he said that Germany was the greatest supporter of Ukraine, which obviously wasn't true, because Poland was the greatest supporter of Ukraine, and actually Germany was very reluctant to help Ukraine until a very, very long time. So this speech was interpreted as not having to do anything with grain, but as an example of a changing orientation of Ukraine, changing geopolitical orientation towards Germany, away from its friends in Eastern Europe towards Germany, and supporting its geopolitical goals. And of course, Ukraine wants to be admitted to the European Union. So in a way, it shows Germany as a patron of that. And Germany wants to centralize decision-making within the European Union. So there are all these proposals being made that in order to expand European Union to offer membership to Ukraine, there must be depriving of a veto power of the countries who are already members of the European Union. And that would basically leave power with Germany, the biggest countries, and other German-speaking countries that are allied with it. And it would sort of leave Eastern Europe without representation. So this speech by President Zelensky at the United Nations, it caused a crisis in relations with Poland. So first of all, of course, there was a loss of confidence in the Ukrainian government. And it was regarded that Zelensky is a sort of a old Soviet-style leader, that he uses these power relations, that he is not emotionally involved. He decided that his interest lied with Germany, so he decided to go with that. And he's telling East Europeans, it's my way or the highway, that he's beholden to these oligarchs that govern Ukraine and who are represented in these agro holdings, and that there is rampant corruption within the Ukrainian government agencies. And it's very hard to actually make an agreement with them, because you know that they will not agree with it. And with all that, there was a loss, and not only on behalf of the Polish government, but the Polish society as a whole. And there is a basic consensus on the subject. There was a loss of this emotional appeal of Ukraine. There was loss of this identification with Ukraine's fate. And that brought a reassessment of relations, that if Ukraine only cares about its own interests and where the power lies, then the East Europeans should do the same. And they should also look at Ukraine in terms of their own interests. And of course, here we have the situation of conflict with farmers, but on a sort of a strategic level, it was decided as originally that yes, it is important to support Ukraine in order to keep the Soviet army from the Russian army from conquering it, and to keep it away from the borders of NATO. So that remained the same. But also this reassessment, it brought other issues to the fore, which until now were hidden because they were regarded as secondary in terms of helping Ukraine to live through this invasion. And one of the most important is so-called Volhynia massacre, where during the World War II, Ukrainian insurgent army, which are Ukrainian partisans, who were at times allied with Germans, murdered several 100,000 of Polish citizens in Volhynia and other parts of Ukraine that used to belong to Poland before World War II. So between 100,000 and 300,000 people were murdered. And there is demand in Poland for commemoration of the dead, for finding their bones, for burying them, and for sort of establishing the facts and cemeteries in Ukraine as a memorial to these massacres. And so far, Ukrainian government does not want to talk about it. So that was one very important consequence of this crisis. But another one was that this public denouncement of East European governments by Zelensky at the United Nations contributed significantly to the loss in elections. Both the Polish government and the Slovak government lost the elections, and these were very pro-Ukrainian governments. So then we have a new government in Poland under leadership of Donald Tusk, who comes in on 13th of December 2023. And it presents itself as being very pro-European and being in the European mainstream. So that means that basically they will follow European Union policies on different issues. At that time, Polish farmer protests intensified because nothing was done about this onslaught of grain, even though the embargo is still kept, it is still on. But they were also joined by other European farmers all over Europe. So there are protests, there are farmer tractors out in the streets. And in Poland farmers occupied border crossings, not only with Ukraine, where they would only allow the military aid and also trucks with grain, but at a slower pace than usual. They would also occupy border crossings with Germany and with Lithuania, where these trucks would go and then return to Poland, claiming to be European grain. So there is huge unrest in terms of farmers. And Zelensky is calling them again Russian agents. They are morally deficient because they are not allowing, the protesters are not allowing this indiscriminate flooding of Polish market by Ukrainian grain. But what happens is that European Union at the time is sort of using this occasion of war to completely change the model of European agriculture. So first you had this opening to Ukraine and imports of grain. At the beginning of 2024, European Union brings in what is called the European Green Deal, which is very strict regulations, environmental regulations that are aimed towards farmers. And this is the main thing that the West European farmers are protesting about. As a result of these protests, European Union pulls back a little bit. It suspends some of the regulations for 1 year. It changes some of them, makes them easier for farmers. And to some extent, they think that that took care of this issue. But the other area where there is a complete change in policy is the opening of borders of the EU to imports of grain, not only from Ukraine, but also from other countries. And European Union signs an agreement with Mercosur, the Organization of Latin American countries, but then it is suspended right now because of these protests. But it turns out that the European Union also imports a lot of grain from Russia because there are no sanctions on imports of food from Russia. So especially Southern European countries are buying a lot of grains from Russia, which is pushing out East Europeans who used to provide grain there. And at the same time, West Europeans are selling their goods to Russia, like cheese and olive oil and stuff like that. So it turns out that this is a big protest. Many people assume that this is also a protest, this is also an issue in Eastern Europe, but it turns out that actually it had a fairly small effect on Eastern Europe, except for Lithuania. The Ukrainian grain still remains the main issue in Eastern Europe. So because of all these demonstrations, there are demands for change, there are demands to do something about this onslaught of grain. So only about a week ago, the European Parliament makes a decision to answer these protests. And despite the demands that there is an embargo on Russian grain, that does not happen, but European Union puts in 50% duty on imports of Russian grain. Then about the European grain, about the Ukrainian grain, I'm sorry. So there are these demonstrations and European Union says, well, on one hand, we want to help Ukraine, even though they are not really helping Ukraine, but they are helping these huge agro holdings that are registered in the West in general, and they do not pay taxes to Ukraine. So it's not really helping Ukraine, but they say, okay, we have to help Ukraine on one part, and then, of course, take help also our own farmers within the European Union. So they put in these limits, supposedly, but these limits are calculated on the basis of wartime years to 2022 and 2023, and 6 months of 2021. So these are peak years of imports of Ukrainian grain. So you're putting a limit where the peak is, which was unacceptable to begin with. And they are saying that if you are dissatisfied with that, you can petition the European Commission and maybe it will do something about it if they think that you are right. But of course, the European Commission officials did not do anything until now. So why would they do anything now? So they make it appear as if they are putting some sort of limits on imports of Ukrainian grain, but in practice, these limits are meaningless. So what is another way that they can limit these imports? And this is by negotiating a bilateral agreement between Polish and Ukrainian governments. And the Tusk government has been trying to do it for months, but the Ukrainian government is unwilling to sign anything like this. They don't want any limits. They want to have free hand about importing their grain. They are calling the example of the European Union and saying we have a right to export whatever we want. They do not want to agree to any sort of limitations on a bilateral basis in Poland. So my conclusions from that is that at first you had this total love, total support for Ukraine and sort of plans for the future that happened at the beginning of the invasion. But now that we have 2 years of the invasion, there are all these other forces that come to the fore and who have their own agendas. And in a sense, they are using the extraordinary situation of wartime to push agendas that are not really directly related to the war. So, of course, first we have the Ukrainian government, and they completely gave up, it seems, on exporting their grain to third world countries like they did originally. And they decided that they want to export to European Union countries. It's much closer, they are richer, they pay more, it's much more lucrative. So they decided they want to export there. They have complete disregard for livelihood of others. There is corruption, there is Soviet-style power politics, and they are using sort of moral blackmail and insults in order to enforce their will that their oligarchs have a right to export to European Union, and this will happen regardless of cost of to anybody else. They are really engaging in predatory behavior towards their closest friends, other East Europeans who so identified with them. And just to emphasize that point, a few days ago, Ukraine agriculture minister was arrested for corruption, for seizing people's land to give it to somebody else. He paid $2 million bond and he was let out, and he's still Ukrainian agriculture minister. So it just underlines the problems that lie there, and the East Europeans are the ones who are paying the most for it. Then the European Union also used this destabilization provided by the war to completely change agricultural policies within the European Union. Without any discussion, without any permission, they decided on one hand to sharpen environmental regulations to make European agriculture even more inefficient, even more expensive, which leads to deliberate destruction of European family farms. On the other hand, opening of borders to large outside producers with lower standards. And the main providers of this grain are Ukraine and Russia. So basically, it completely contradicts this not only the livelihood of millions of farmers within Europe, but also food security of the European Union as a whole. And this happened without really any discussion. And the third area where there is also a push for changes under the shadow of war is Germany. And the German deal with Ukraine, and basically they are saying that in order to expand European Union to Ukraine and maybe Moldavia, these countries that are vulnerable to Russian power, we must have centralization of the European Union. We must deprive of veto power smaller countries, and Germany, which is the strongest, has the biggest economy. It also has German-speaking allies. So it's sort of a dominant bloc that they will make all the decisions, and other countries will really not have their interests represented at the European Union level. So I would say that the future of Europe will be determined by the resolution of these different and clashing agendas, and the East Europeans and Poland especially have the most to lose about what will happen in the end in the application of this new model. Thank you very much.